The eyes in the wallpaper. The isolation was a variable I had calculated. In fact, it was the primary selling point. I am a man of logic, of cause and effect. I do not believe in things that go bump in the night. I believe in old plumbing, settling foundations, and the acoustic peculiarities of Victorian architecture. When I rented the Blackwood estate in Darkest, Vermont, I did so specifically because the silence would force my mind to vomit up the manuscript I had been choking on for 2 years. The agent, a jittery local man with wet eyes, tried to warn me about the history. I cut him off with a check. History is just gossip that has solidified into sediment. It cannot hurt you. The study was the only room that mattered. It was a cavernous space on the second floor, dominated by a window that looked out onto the encroaching tree line. But it was the wallpaper that claimed the room. It was a hideous, aggressive shade of ochre, stamped with a damask pattern so intricate it seemed less like design and more like a biological accident. Convoluted spirals choked each other, blooming into fungal shapes that pulsed like veins under the ochre skin. Garish, I muttered on the first night, setting up my typewriter, but serviceable. The first week was productive. The snow began to form, a white curtain dropping between the house and the world, sealing me in a vacuum of silence. I wrote 5,000 words. I drank black coffee. I slept like the dead. It was on the 7th day that pareidolia set in the mind's glitch, perceiving faces in chaos, a survival instinct gone haywire. I was staring at the wall, searching for a synonym for despair, when I noticed the pattern to the left of the fireplace. The swirling tendrils aligned in a way that suggested a brow ridge. Below it, 2 oval gaps in the print formed sockets. A curve in the vinework suggested a mouth. It looked like a face screaming in silence. I chuckled, rubbing my tired eyes. "Very good," I said aloud. The sound of my own voice was flat, swallowed instantly by the heavy velvet drapes. The brain seeks order in chaos. Go to bed, Arthur. But the next morning, the face was clearer. I attributed it to the shifting light. The winter sun in Vermont is a weak, anemic thing, casting long, distorting shadows. As the sun moved across the sky, the shadows in the paper's texture deepened, granting the illusion of depth to the two-dimensional print. I sat down to write. The keys clacked, a machine gun rhythm against the silence, but my eyes kept drifting to the left. The face had changed. Yesterday, it had been screaming. Today, the mouth was closed, the lips pursed in a look of intense, hateful concentration, and the eyes, the negative space between the yellow vines, seemed to be looking directly at my hands. "Ridiculous," I hissed, ripping the page from the roller. I crumpled it up and threw it at the wall. It bounced off the spot where the nose would be. I spent the next 3 days fighting a war on 2 fronts, the blank page and the wall. The snow had turned into a blizzard, burying the first floor. The wind howled like a wounded animal, rattling the window panes. The house groaned, the timbers contracting in the bitter cold. Thermal contraction, I reminded myself. Physics. But physics couldn't explain why, whenever I left the room and returned, the faces multiplied. They were everywhere now. The wallpaper was no longer a repeating pattern. It was a crowd. There were old faces, young faces, faces twisted in agony, faces slack with idiocy. They emerged from the wrought yellow background like swimmers surfacing for air, and they were all watching me. I stopped writing. I couldn't focus. The sheer weight of their gaze was physical, a pressure on the back of my neck. I moved my desk to face the wall, determined to stare down this hallucination. I would break the illusion by analyzing it. "You are ink and paper," I told them. You are cellulose and pigment. The face directly in front of me, a new one, sharp-featured and cruel, seemed to smirk. The isolation was getting to me. That was the only logical conclusion. Cabin fever. Sensory deprivation causing the brain to fabricate stimuli. I needed to leave. I went to the door, intending to walk down to the village. Snow or no snow, the door wouldn't open. I rattled the handle. Locked? I hadn't locked it. I threw my shoulder against the heavy oak. It didn't budge. It felt less like a jammed door and more like the wood had fused with the frame, a single solid mass. Fine. I breathed, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The window. I turned back to the study. The light was failing. The room was bathed in a bruised purple twilight. The walls were breathing. It was subtle, a rhythmic expansion and contraction of the plaster, causing the paper to ripple like the skin of a sleeping beast. The rustling sound wasn't the wind. It was the friction of paper on paper, a dry, whispering slide. I backed away, retreating to the center of the room. The faces were distinct now, hyper-realistic. I could see the pores in the yellowed texture. I could see the wet sheen in the eyes. Eyes. They weren't negative space anymore. They were wet. They glistened. They darted back and forth, tracking my movements. Hundreds of them. A jury of the damned, and I was the accused. "This isn't real," I screamed, my voice cracking. "I am a rational man. This is a construct of a stressed mind." The house laughed. It didn't come from a throat. It came from the structure itself, a low, grinding vibration that shook the floorboards and rattled my teeth. The wallpaper rippled violently, the vines tightening like constrictor snakes. I grabbed the letter opener from my desk, a heavy brass thing, sharp enough to draw blood. "I see the trick," I yelled, lunging at the wall. "It's a projection, a mechanism." I slashed at the wall. The blade sank in with a sickening wet thwack. Not the dry tear of paper. A thick, musty warmth radiated from the slash. I tore downwards, ripping a long strip of the ochre paper away. There was no plaster beneath, no lath, no brick. Beneath the paper was a glistening, pinkish membrane. It pulsed, raw and exposed. Mold. I gibbered, my mind scrambling for purchase on the cliff of insanity. Just fungal growth, extensive dry rot. I stabbed again, frantic now. I had to find the brick. I had to find the reality beneath the nightmare. I clawed with my bare hands, ripping sheets of the skin-like paper away. The smell hit me then, not dust, but copper and old meat. I tore a massive section away near the fireplace, panting, sweat stinging my eyes. "There," I shrieked. "See? Just a wall." But I stopped. I wasn't looking at brick. I was looking into a room. Through the hole I had torn in the skin of the room, I was looking into another study, identical to my own. It was dimly lit, silent, and in that room, sitting at the desk, was a man. He was facing away from me, hunched over the typewriter. He wore my tweed jacket. He had my hair, my posture. "Hello?" I whispered. The man in the other room stopped typing. He slowly turned his head. It was me. But it wasn't a reflection. The angle was wrong. And his expression, it wasn't fear. It was a mask of pure, sorrowful pity. He looked at me, and then he looked past me, as if I were part of the wall he was staring at. Then the realization hit me with the force of a hammer. I looked down at my hands. They were flat, two-dimensional. I tried to pull away from the wall, but I couldn't move my feet. I couldn't feel my legs. I wasn't tearing into the wall. I was tearing out of it, The perspective shifted violently. I wasn't in the room. I never had been. The I that I thought I was the rational man, the skeptic, was just a memory being digested, a fresh layer of consciousness pasted over the old. I watched, paralyzed, as the man in the chair, the new tenant, the real Arthur, stood up. He looked at the wall where I was trapped. He looked directly into my eyes. He squinted, rubbing his chin. "Curious?" the new Arthur muttered, his voice muffled, as if coming from underwater. "That pattern, it almost looks like a face, a screaming face." He chuckled, a sound of supreme, arrogant rationality. "Pareidolia," he said, turning back to his work. "Just a trick of the light. I tried to scream, to warn him, to tell him that the house doesn't just house you, it becomes you. But my mouth was full of paste and paper. I could only watch. I am the yellow damask now. I am the spiral. I am the eyes in the wallpaper. And winter is very, very long."